There are 2 times, at least, that I can count. Perhaps there are more. I could have spent more time trying to count and find other ones, but two times that come to mind for me in the Gospels where Jesus took on something voluntarily that is considered torture. And of course, the most obvious is when he takes on Good Friday and the cross and the scourging and all that surrounded that. Obviously is torturous. But I also think today's gospel, Jesus voluntarily heads into, in a sense, solitary confinement. That some people consider, at least, depending on the source, certain countries and so forth, consider that to be a torture. Because some people, when put into solitary confinement, have a sort of psychological reaction to that, and delusions and hallucinations and other things, and so it's a very challenging circumstance. And yet Jesus heads out into that and does that on his own. He goes out into the desert for 40 days. Right? And we can always say, well, he was fully divine, but he was also fully human, right? His humanity, he was human in the way that you and I are, so he experienced everything that you and I experience in that sense of being a human person. And so just as it's a challenge for you and I in his humanity, those 40 days would have been a challenge for him as well. And, I'm sure, you and I have had the experience before where we've maybe tried to sit down to pray and haven't been able to make it, 10 minutes before we, have to run off and do something else, or, we're pulled in this direction or that direction. It's very hard to pray and to spend time in silence. I remember when I was in the seminary and I kept hearing this phrase that older guys were using, talking about, I need to go do a holy hour. I need to go do a holy hour. I'm like, what's a holy hour? And it was basically being still in church and just sitting there in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament and being silent. And so I asked my spiritual director about it, and he said, why don't you start out with a holy 15 minutes first? What's the difference? I found out pretty quick the difference between the two, right? We all know that. We know how challenging it can be to be alone, to be silent, to be still before God. Not because God is scary or any of those sorts of things, but because we, in a sense, have been masking over things a lot of times that we know down deep we need to confront, we need to stare them down, we need to bring them before God and ask God to heal us. But we've been masking over, and so there's this sense in which we avoid it, we run away from it, we even medicate or use other things to cover over what we know we need to be dealing with. And so when we see Jesus heading out for 40 days, giving himself nowhere else to turn, no food, none of those other comforts of life out in the desert where there's literally nothing else. One time I spent some time hiking in Alaska, and I did a month by a lake, just kind of camping out there, and I brought in a lot of books, but I had food, I had things to read, things to do, saw other people and stuff, and even that was a real challenge, right? So this is a heroic thing that Jesus does, right? And the courage that it takes. I'm amazed by the strength and the courage that it would take to say, you know what, for 40 days, I'm not going to comfort myself in any way. I'm not going to distract myself. I'm going to be alone with God. We too obviously pattern our Lent around this idea, right? In small ways. None of us are taking the next 40 days probably to go out, be alone with God completely for all 40 days. But we try to give up something or some things, try to let go of some things so that we have less places to turn. Right? We have less things to medicate ourselves with, less things to, continue to consume so that we don't have to confront what it is that we know we need to confront in ourselves. Right? And so I think what we need to be thinking about too is, first of all, recognizing that Christ did it on a much greater scale. And so we need to take we need to look at that, and we need to allow Christ to give us the inspiration. And when we're struggling in our Lenten resolutions, remembering the fact that Christ did it for 40 days with nothing, right? Without anything else to turn to. But then I also think maybe taking this example today, or this heroic effort by Christ to go out into the desert, to also look at our Lent. We're a couple days in, and I think sometimes, I know I did this a lot when I was growing up Catholic. I would give up these things over here and set them to the side, and then fill it up with other stuff. Fill up the space that I cleared in my life by giving up this or that thing, or trying to, not play video games or whatever. But then, I gave up video games, but then I watched an extra hour of TV anyway, or instead, And so, while we're not going out into the desert for 40 days, I think we do well to think about the fact that Christ gave himself nowhere else to turn. And so you too, you and I, in our Lenten journeys, in the things that we're doing for Lent, and the things that we're fasting from, and the things that we're giving up, may we clear that space out, but then allow it to be filled by God. Allow it to be filled by silence. Allow it to be filled by the desert. Right? Whatever space we create, that's why throughout the years the church has encouraged, or saints and so forth have encouraged us to do this during the season of Lent. Clearing out space so that it can be filled by God. And what we find when we do that, of course, is we find a real peace. When we finally confront what's going on inside ourselves, when we finally turn inward and we do some introspection, and then we bring that before God. It's not just a psychological exercise. There's a spiritual, obviously, component too. I'm looking inward, and I'm bringing that to God, and I'm saying, Lord, here I am, heal me. None of that can take place, though, if I'm filling up what I cleared out by my Lenten promises with other junk, with other stuff, with other distractions. We need that healing. We need this time. I've already, in a couple of days, on Thursday and Friday in particular, just kind of having that space cleared out, I could breathe again. I didn't even know I couldn't breathe before. But having that stuff out of the way, there was that sense of just being able to, okay, yeah, this is good. I needed this. I needed this encounter with God. I needed to spend more time in introspection. I needed to, in many ways, slow down and get rid of some of those things that I thought I needed. And so we pray to have that amazing courage to do something like what Christ did in heading out into the desert. We pray that we may be inspired by his example of his strength to go out into the wilderness, to spend that time to clear out all of that space so that he could be with his Father in the Spirit. May our Lenten sacrifices and the things that we're doing this season allow us to have a similar experience.